This is chapter 3 of Gathering Blue. Now, in chapter 2, Kira, the young girl with a crippled leg, goes back to her house after leaving the field of leaving where her mother died, or she spent 4 days waiting for her mother's spirit to leave. She arrives where her house used to be, and she knows she might have to rebuild it. She wants to rebuild it, but she doesn't really have many friends or family anymore. So she's sitting down, and a woman starts stealing vegetables from her garden because Kira's hungry and she can't hunt. She doesn't have family to help her, so she's eating the vegetables from her garden. The lady named Vandera, this big, tall, muscly, scary lady that everyone's scared of, tells her she's going to build something where Kira's house was, basically telling Kira she's going to have to leave the community or they will kill her. Vandera makes all the other women pick up a rock, ready to throw them at Kira. But Kira's smart, and she reminds them of the rules of the community, that they have to go speak to the Council of Guardians, and that the Council of Guardians will decide if Kira can stay or if she has to leave to the forest where the beasts are. That was chapter 2. Chapter 3. A messenger, bored and scratching at an insect bite on his neck, came to Kira in the morning, and told her that she must report to the Council of Guardians at late morning. When the sun was approaching midday, she tidied herself and went, obedient to his instruction. So a messenger tells her, you need to go speak to the Council of Guardians. The council edifice was surprisingly splendid and nice. It remained from before the ruin, a time so far past that none of the people now living, none of their parents or grandparents had been born. The people knew of the ruin only from the song that was presented at the yearly gathering. So she's going to this building where the council are. She says it's a nice one. And it had actually been there since a time called the ruin, which happened many years ago. Rumor said that the singer, whose job in the village was the annual presentation of the song, prepared his voice by resting for days and sipping certain oils. The ruin song was lengthy, was long and exhausting. It began with the beginning of time, telling the entire story of the people over countless centuries, hundreds of years. It was frightening too. The story of the past was filled with warfare, wars, and disasters. Most especially, it was frightening when it recalled the ruin, the end of the civilization of the ancestors. Verses told of smoky, poisonous fumes, of great fractures in the earth itself, of the way huge buildings fell and toppled and were swept away by the seas. All of the people were required to listen each year, but sometimes mothers protectively covered the ears of their smallest tykes during the description of the ruin. So they're talking about a little bit more about the community, that there's a person called the singer whose job is to tell the story of the history of their community through a song. And this one particular moment in this community was called the ruin, which was when buildings were falling over. There were earthquakes, the earth was moving, lots of people died, there were poisonous fumes, lots of smoke. And it's thought to be one of the worst times in the history of this community. Very little, not many people, had survived the ruin. But somehow the building called the council edifice had remained standing and strong and firm. It was immeasurably old, so old. Several windows still contained patterned glasses of deep reds and golds, amazing things, for knowledge of the way of making such remarkable glass had been lost. So she's describing how beautiful the windows are. Some remaining windows, ones in which the colored glass had shattered and broken, were now paned in a thick, ordinary glass that distorted the view through bubbles and ripples. Other windows were simply boarded over, and part of the building's interior were darkly shadowed. Still, the edifice was magnificent in comparison to the ordinary and boring sheds and cottages of the village. Kira, reporting near midday as she had been ordered by the messenger, walked alone down a long hallway lit on either side by sputtering flames from tall scones fed with oil. She could hear the voices of the meeting ahead, behind a closed door, men's voice and muted arguing. Her stick thumped on a wooden floor, and at the foot of her flawed leg brushed the boards with a sweeping sound, as if she dragged a broom. So she's walking through this building where she's going to have the meeting with the council, where they will decide if she can stay or if she can't. Take pride in your pain, her mother had always told her. You are stronger than those who have none. Because remember, her leg doesn't work, so she needs a stick to help her walk. She remembered that now and tried to find the pride that her mother had taught her to feel proud of herself. She straightened her thin shoulders and smoothed the folds of her coarsely woven shift. She had washed carefully in the clear stream water and had cleaned her nails with a sharp twig. She had combed her hair with the carved wooden comb that had been her mother's, and which she had added to her own small storage sack after her mother's death. Then she had braided her hair, using her hands to interweave the thick, dark strands deftly, trying the end of the heavy plait with a leather strip. So she got herself ready using things that most people wouldn't use, like sticks and a comb. Steadying her apprehensions with a deep breath, so she's nervous, Kira knocked on the heavy door to the room, where the Council of Guardians meeting was already in progress. The door opened a crack, spilling a wedge of light into the dim hall. A man looked out and eyed her suspiciously. He widened the opening and gestured her to come inside. The accused orphan girl, Kira, is here. Orphan means when you don't have parents, the door guard announced, and the muttered subsided. In silence, they all turned to watch her enter. The room was huge. Kira had been there before with her mother on ceremonial occasions like the annual gathering, like the yearly gathering where everyone comes together. Then they had sat with the crowds of rows on benches, facing the stage that was furnished only with an altar table holding the worship object, the mysterious wooden construction of two sticks connected to form a cross. It was said to have had great power in the past, and the people always bowed briefly and humbly toward it in respect. So she's describing this huge room where her and her mother have been before for a yearly gathering where people worship something. But now she was alone. There were no crowds, no ordinary citizens, only the Council of Guardians, 12 men who sat facing her across a long table at the foot of the stage. So there are 12 other men. Rows of oil lamps made the room bright, and each of the men had his personal torch behind him, lighting, illuminating stacked and scattered papers that lay on the table. They watched her as she made her way hesitantly up the aisle. Quickly remembering the procedure that she had seen at every ceremony, Kira arranged her hands in a reverent position, cupped together, fingertips below her chin, as she arrived at the table and looked respectfully toward the worship object on the stage. The guardians nodded approvingly. Apparently, it had been the right gesture. She relaxed a bit, waiting, wondering what would happen next. So she's walking down, she's holding her hands in a respectful way, and she looks at the object that people have to worship. The guardians are happy that she's done that, and she sits down. The door guard responded to a second knock and announced a second entry. The accuser, Vanderer, he called. So it was to be the two of them. Kira watched as Vanderer walked rapidly toward the table until they were side by side, facing the Council of Guardians. It gave her a small feeling of satisfaction to notice that Vanderer's feet were bare and her face dirty. The woman had made no special preparations. Perhaps none was necessary. But Kira felt the responsibility that she had gained a small bit of respect, a small advantage with her cleanliness. So Vanderer is dirty and ugly, but Kira comes all beautiful. Vanderer made the worshipful gesture with her hands, so they were even there. Then Vanderer bowed, and Kira saw with a twinge of concern that the guardians nodded their heads toward her. I should have bowed. I must find an occasion to bow. We meet to pass judgment on a conflict, to talk about what happened. The chief guardian, a white-haired man with a 4-syllable name that Kira could never remember, spoke in an authoritative voice. I had no conflict. I only wanted to rebuild my house, my cot, and live my life. Who is the accuser? The white-haired man asked. Of course he knew the answer, Kira thought. But the questions seemed to be ceremonial, part of the formal proceedings, so what he has to say. It was answered by another one of the guardians, a fat, heavy-set man at the end of the table who had several thick books and a stack of papers in front of him. Kira looked at and eyed the volumes curiously. She had always yearned to read, wanted to learn to read, but women were not allowed. Chief Guardian, the accuser is the woman Vanderer. And the accused? The accused is the orphan girl Kira. The man glanced at the papers but didn't seem to be reading anything. Accused? What am I accused of? What did she do wrong? Hearing the repetition of the word, Kira felt a wave of panic. But I can use it as a chance to bow and show humility. She inclined her head and upper body slightly, acknowledging herself as the accused, the person who did something wrong. The white-haired man looked at the two of them dispassionately, not happy. Kira, leaning on her stick, tried to stand as straight as possible. She was almost as tall as her accuser, as Vanderer. But Vanderer was older, heavier, and unflawed except for the scar, the reminder that she had fought a beast and escaped alive. Hideous though it was, ugly, the scar emphasized and showed Vanderer's strength. Kira's flaw carried no illustrious history, and she felt weak, inadequate, and doomed beside the disfigured, angry woman. So on the right of her is Vanderer, this big, strong lady. But then Kira has a crippled leg. She can't stand straight. She doesn't look strong. The accuser will speak first, the chief guardian instructed. Vanderer's voice was firm and bitter, annoyed. The girl should have been taken away to the field when she was born and still nameless. It is the way. Go on, the chief guardian said. She was imperfect, not perfect, and fatherless as well. She should not have been kept alive. But I was strong, and my eyes were bright. My mother told me. She wouldn't let me go. Kira shifted her weight, resting her twisted leg, remembering the story of her birth, and wondering if she would have an opportunity to tell it here. I gripped her thumb so tightly. So Vanderer is saying, this girl doesn't have a dad, she's useless, she never should have survived. But Kira remembers that when she was born, her mother told her she was amazing. We have all tolerated her presence for these years, Vanderer went on, but she has not contributed. She cannot dig or plant or weed, or even tend the domestic beasts the way the other girls her age do. She drags that dead leg, her crippled leg, around like a useless burden. She is slow and eats a lot. The Council of Guardians was listening carefully. Kira's face felt warm with embarrassment. It was true that she ate a lot. It was all true, what her accuser was saying. I can try to eat less. I can go hungry. In her mind, Kira prepared her defense, but even as she did, she felt that it would be weak and whining. She was kept against the rules because her grandfather was still alive and had power. But he is long gone, replaced by a new leader with more power and wisdom. Vanderer oozed compliments designed to strengthen her case, and Kira glanced and looked at the chief guardian to see if he was swayed by the flattery. So Vanderer's cleverly saying all these amazing things about the guardians. But his face was impassive. Her father was killed by beasts even before her birth, and now her mother is dead, Vanderer went on. There is even reason to think that her mother may have carried an illness that will endanger others. No, she was the only one to fall ill. Look at me. I lay beside her when she died, and I am not sick. And the woman need the space where the cot was. There is no room for this useless girl. She can't marry. No one wants a cripple. She takes up space and food, and she causes problems with the discipline of tykes, telling them stories, teaching them games so that they make noise and disrupt the work. The chief guardian waved his hand. Enough, he announced. Vanderer frowned and fell silent. She bowed slightly. The chief guardian looked around the table at the 11 others as if he sought comments or questions. One by one they nodded at him. No one said anything. Kira, the white-haired chief guardian said, as a 2-syllable girl, you are not required to defend yourself. Not defend myself? But... Kira had planned to bow again, but forgot in her urgency. Now she remembered, but her bow was an awkward afterthought. He waved his hand again, signaling her silence, telling her to be quiet. She forced herself to be still and to listen. Because of your youth, how young you are, he explained, you have a choice. You may defend yourself. She interrupted again, unable to stop. Oh, yes, I want to He ignored her outburst. Or we will appoint a defender on your behalf. One of us will defend you, using our great wisdom and guidance. Take a moment to think about this, because your life may depend on it, Kira. But you are strangers to me. How can you tell the story of my birth? How can you describe my bright eyes, the strength of my hand as I gripped my mother's thumb? Kira stood helplessly, her future at stake. She felt the hostility and anger beside her. Vandera's breath was quick and angry through her voice, though her voice had been silenced. She looked at the men seated around the table, trying to assess them as defenders. But she felt from them neither hostility nor much interest, just a sense of expectation as they waited for her decision. So the councillor saying, hey, you're young, so you don't have to defend yourself. We can help you, or you can do it yourself. As Kira agonized, her hands pushed their way into the deep pockets of her woven shift. She felt the familiar outline of her mother's wooden comb and stroked it for comfort. With her thumb, she felt a small square of decorated woven cloth. She had forgotten the strip of cloth in her recent confusing days. Now she remembered how this design, had come, unbidden to her hands as she sat beside her mother in her last days. So she puts her hands in her pockets and she has some items that make her feel better, that remind her of her mother, because her mother was always telling her how strong she was. When she was much younger, the knowledge had come quite unexpectedly to her, and she recalled the look of amazement on her mother's face as she watched Kira choose and pattern the threads one afternoon with a sudden sureness. I didn't teach you that, her mother said, laughing with delight and astonishment, surprised. I wouldn't know how. Kira hadn't known how either, not really. It had come about almost magically, as if the threads had spoken to her or sung. After that first time, the knowledge had grown. So remember, when she was younger, she wasn't good at anything because her leg stopped her from doing things. But she's very good at creating patterns and materials with her hands. She clutched and held the cloth, remembering the sense of certainty it had given to her. She felt none of the sureness now. A speech of defense was not within her. She knew that she would have to relinquish that role to one of these men, all strangers. She looked at them with frightened eyes and saw one looking calmly, reassuringly back. She sensed his importance to her. She sensed something more, awareness, experience. Kira took a deep breath. The threaded cloth was warm and familiar in her hand. She trembled, she was shaking, but her voice was certain. Please appoint a defender, she said. The chief guardian nodded. Jameson, he said firmly, and nodded to the third man on his left. The man with calm, attentive eyes rose, got up to defend Kira. She waited. Okay, so there's a lot of description in this chapter which might feel confusing, but it's very simple. Kira has to go to the guardians, the committee, the people that are in charge of making decisions. She goes there with Vandera, trying to be very respectful and to wear nice clothes. She goes there and Vandera, the lady, is saying, hey, this lady needs to be gone. We don't need her in this community. She should have died when she was younger. We don't need her. Then the guardian with the white hair, the old one, says, Kira, you're only a 2-syllable name. You're young. You do not have to defend yourself. You can choose one of us. Kira's very nervous, and she doesn't think she has the ability to defend herself. So she asks them to defend her. This man, Jameson, is about to defend her life. That's the end of